Hello, this is my English project. I did mine on how different ideologies, East and West, develops differently in aerospace, particularly. In particular, military aircraft up from the Second World War to modern day. I hope you all enjoy. Alrighty, I'm gonna start off with the basics. What is an aircraft? An aircraft is just something with, let's just say, a propeller for propulsion and a wing for lift. That's basically the gist of an aircraft. You know, air goes over and under a wing, generating lift due to the propulsion pulling it forward from the propeller, or if it's a jet, air going in to the jet engine itself, speeding up really quickly because of the fans, and then shooting out faster than it came in. Fundamentally, that's how an aircraft works. I know I kind of went over just a whole bunch of details and all sorts of stuff, but that's kind of the gist of it. All right, Second World War. Yeah, it was a pretty terrible time for a lot of people, but for one group in particular, it was pretty awesome. Engineers. They had a blast. They had near unlimited money. Unlimited. If this was the chart for their money, yeah, and this was money, and this was money. This is the chart right here. It's off the charts. Unlimited money. The government was throwing every government: French, British, Soviet, German, Japanese, Chinese. They weren't really good. Chinese didn't have a good. Aside from the Chinese, everyone was throwing as much money, as much funding, as many people really as possible to engineers to make. It was horrible. Like Lockheed Martin, they got their big hoo-ha in the Second World War making the P-38. And not only was the P-38, quite frankly, probably one of the greatest aircraft of the Second World War, it terrified and terrorized the Japanese so effectively that they probably, if they had won the war, would have destroyed any remaining copies of that aircraft for how many generals it killed over the Pacific. But engineers made a lot of things during that time. Some of those being series of Zeros, Ki-84s, Messerschmitts, 109s, 110s, and then the Me-262, the very first jet aircraft. I'll touch on that later. Soviets cranked out Yaks and just a whole bunch of trash like nothing. Italians had their... What did the Italians have? They just had worse Bf-109s, if I'm honest. The Brits, they spat out Spitfires. Like, everyone was kind of like, well, we just got invaded for the third time in about 3 years. It doesn't really need to do much other than fly and have about 8 machine guns on there. And by God, did that deliver. Alright, the shakeup of post-Second World War alliances and politics between the Soviets and the Western aligned nations really kind of was the kicker of all of this military buildup and all this kind of craziness that went on. Still kind of is going on, but that's neither here nor there. Is they like we did in Operation Paperclip, basically took Germany, divided it like that. We got all the guys from West Germany. We sent them off to wherever in America. You know, Soviets, a little less kind to them. They sent them off in the middle of nowhere in Siberia and basically said, "You're going to build us planes, or we're going to." Now, if you believe it, that's a very hard sell for some, and for others, it's very easy. Some German scientists, which helped, and German engineers, which helped in the development of the Me-262, which was the very first. I already said that, but it was shockingly the very first jet aircraft ever fielded. There was so many different variants of it: strike aircraft, interceptors, jets. They even had some bombers they were working on. Like these were really ahead of their time. And touching on the ideology aspect, now I think of it, the jets themselves were hindered heavily by Nazi ideology because Hitler genuinely thought that he could make a multi-role aircraft for the time, which way ahead of its time, but they didn't have the technology for it, so they wasted even more money when the Soviets were literally at the gates of Berlin trying to strap bombs to an Me-262 when it just wasn't really designed or made for that. Either do. it was kind of crazy. Later, the Soviets, with those German scientists they took, developed the Su-9 and Su-11, which the Me-262 and the Sukhoi 9-11. So the Su-9, yeah, exact same carbon copy. They used Soviet guns, Soviet engines. It's a little bit better because they had better technology and engineering at the time because they weren't actively in a war, but exact same aircraft. But in the West, Western designers took a little bit more of a different approach. They initially they thought, well, I mean, these German scientists, they're really only kind of good for rocketry. Because during the, the Blitz, they were kind of, London was getting shelled by, rockets, pretty much, and they were like, the West was like, oh my god, rockets, it's insane, they can fling these at us. And for a time, there was like, propellers are the future. I mean, it's a proven technology that Western generals were kind of stuck in their old traditions. Big shocker. So, make a little chart here. The West, primarily, they saw jets sort of superfluous. They were like, yeah, it's a technology that works. It's kind of cool. Really, though, propellers, I mean, they kind of work. They're cost effective. I mean, it's kind of why it took us so long to phase out the A-10 for F-15EXs. It's just money. At the end of the day, it's just money. And why spend money when you're at peace? I mean, that was kind of our thought for about 100 years until the Second World War. It's like, we're at peace. Who cares? Doesn't matter. The East, on the other side, they were cooking some crazy stuff. Because of those German scientists they took way back when, and all their inter-bureau rivalries, which really spurred a lot of development because corruption really pays. MiG, Sukhoi, and Yak. Whenever you see a Russian plane, one of these three. And they all hated each other. Like, you think corporations here kind of don't really like each other when it comes to government contracts? These guys hated each other. It was really good. Because Sukhoi would spit out, another Su-11. MiG would cram out an Su-9, a MiG-9, Yak really didn't do much. Yak's kind of out of the picture. You don't really have to worry about Yak. But MiG and Sukhoi, those are the two big players in this future, yeah? These people, they went kind of ham. Well, here in the West, we took our old Second World War Corsairs, our F-4s, and our P-51s, and basically just said, add 20 mils and make it faster. It's just that the MiG-9 was a jet, and if it wasn't constantly failing and constantly crashing into the earth, killing its pilot, because who thought putting a 23 millimeter cannon in front of your air intake would be a great idea? It wasn't. Thus begins Korea. So the Korean War is kind of a weird war in American history. It's like, we don't really think about it. We don't really, it's not really in our head a lot. We're not like, never forget Korea. It was kind of already forgotten 50 years ago. But it's like how we invaded Panama in the 90s. Like, nobody really thinks about it. It's like, it happened. Who cares? But what I want to touch on is how Korea kind of was a major wake-up call for Western aviation, really, because the MiG-15 was a scary jet. It really was. It has superb, and for its time, actually, it was one of the, if not the greatest aircraft ever fielded. And that's not me coping right now. It's genuinely like a great aircraft. And at a crazy turn rate, at a crazy roll rate, I'm not going to write that out, but at a crazy roll rate, its armament was pretty good. 23 mils, 20 mils. I mean, nothing really to write home for Soviet aviation. They kind of put it everywhere. But either way, like, it had really good armament, really good turn rate. It was quick, and it could definitely take a couple of hits. Our response to it, at least in the beginning, because we're sort of like, who cares about jets? They're kind of, we'll see how it pans out, was the F2G, and again the P-51. That was until we realized the folly of that and started cranking out F-86 Sabres and F-80s. Now, the MiG-15 could fight the F-2G and the P-51 and win about, let's just say 60% of the time. 60, 70, 80% of the time. It was almost assured for the MiG pilot that they'd come out on top. Especially if they were going against bombers, like the B-29 up here. It was a pretty easy target. That all kind of changed when these guys got introduced. When we started throwing F-86s and F-80s at them, a lot of stuff started happening. Now that's where a lot of... Alrighty, with the interwar period of Korea and Vietnam, some funny stuff happened in the engineering world, specifically in aerospace. Now I want to touch upon the F-104, the F-4 itself, the F-100. I also want to touch upon the MiG-21 and the Su-22. Now, these series of aircraft right here can easily determine as Western and Eastern. So, I'm just going to go down the line and sort of tell you all which aircraft was which. The 104 was basically just a pencil. Pretty much, this is the design of the F-104. Meant to go really quick, really fast. Really couldn't go too far. It was really only designed as an interceptor, and by God did it deliver in that one role. The F-4 Phantom II, which again probably was one of the greatest aircraft America's ever fielded, solely because of its multi-role capabilities. It could drop warheads on foreheads. It had one of the first missile loadouts and missile systems of any fighter sweep in the country. It was both in the Air Force and the Navy, and I mean, Air Forces around the world still use the F-4. The Turks love the thing. They still use it maybe because they're broke, but they love the thing nonetheless. And the F-100 was a bomber heavily used in Vietnam, primarily used to level pretty much all of it. There's a reason Vietnam was deforested after the war. This thing. On the eastern side, what fought against these Western aircraft was primarily the MiG-21 and the Su-22. Though there were some older MiG-15s and Liam 5Ps in there, but I already covered those. And by this point, the MiG-15 had become all but obsolete because during the quote-unquote age, the missile age, which the F-4 primarily was entered in, it had been rendered quote-unquote obsolete, and I'll touch on that in a minute. So, MiG-21 was primarily a fighter aircraft aimed to gain aerial superiority over Vietnam, and these were Russian pilots, Russian and Chinese. And the MiG-21 primarily fought against the F-4 and vice versa. Of course, the F-104, I don't think the F-104 was in Vietnam, but these were Vietnam-era aircraft. It was primarily MiG-21 fighting these two aircraft, as the MiG-21 was very cheap, and the Soviets could basically throw as many of them as they wanted because very cheap. The Su-22 itself was primarily used as a strike aircraft, though it saw little to no use in Vietnam. Just wanted to touch on that, as it was a Vietnam-era quote-unquote aircraft. So, Western designers primarily, and Eastern designers at the time, because technology quote-unquote was getting a hand of everything, deemed that the age of the dogfight, AOD, was over. They basically thought, well, we have AIM-9Bs, Sidewinders, we have some AIM-7s, it's over, it's Jover. The age of the dogfight never's going to come back. We have this technology that's going to basically make it so if we're behind you, we fire this thing, it's gonna hit you and you're gonna, you know? But what really happened was the F4s got reamed until they started adding gun pods, because the MiG-21, what it would do, as initially it didn't have missiles, it got missiles because an AIM-9B hit a MiG-21 and it didn't explode, and the Russians were like, oh my god, what's this? So they reverse engineered it and they made it the R3R, which in all intents and purposes is just a worse AIM-9B, pretty much, but doesn't really matter into the story. So they got their own missiles, and what would happen is the F4 would get energy trapped by the MiG-21, and pretty much what would happen is the MiG-21 would shoot the F4 down with its main cannon, with its main cannons, because the F4 couldn't really respond, because the Sidewinders weren't, they were close range, but they couldn't really perform as well as needed during a dogfight. So the F4s really got screwed over at the beginning. They quickly realized their fault here and started throwing GAU-8 Avengers on there, which they're just a machine gun, pretty much, 20mm machine gun. And once they started throwing those on there, it kind of leveled the playing field, and that's why the F4 had kind of crazy losses in Vietnam. Aside from that, it was just kind of like a testing ground. It kind of woke up the West that, hey, guns are needed. Swing wings are, they're kind of starting to fiddle with them, with the whole F-100 and the Su-22 thing, because they're like, it's technology, you know, it's not all bad. But they really leaned heavily into throwing guns at everything, and that's why the later, I'm just going to write it over here on the eastern side, the F-4E had a integrated gun, and that's why, and most export models, like let's say the F4J, which was the Japanese variant of the F4, it did have a integrated gun pod in there. So, whole bunch of stuff over here explaining all of that. And basically the whole gist about Vietnam is that, yes, we had a whole bunch of technology, but we didn't really know how to use it. And that even if we did and could use it, we didn't exactly know its capabilities and limitations yet. And it really, in the interwar period between Vietnam and, let's just say, the first Gulf War, that's really where things kind of went haywire. Alrighty, in the interwar period between Vietnam and, let's just say, the first Gulf War, a lot of crazy things happened in aviation. We went from, again, the F4 to the F-15. The F-15 also spawned out the F-16 because Congress thought the F-15 was kind of silly. Again, the Navy, before they landed on the F-18, took their F-4s, basically said, make it bigger and make it cooler, and that spat out the F-14. And the F-14 ultimately spat out, along with the same program that created the F-16, spat out the F-18. So, we have all these Western aircraft. Now let's see what the East was cooking up. It's going to be pretty boring. The MiG-25, a series of MiG-29s, and the MiG-27, sorry, I can't speak. The MiG-27, the Su-23, and finally the big kicker, the Su-27. So, roughly, I'll break this down into a few categories for you. The MiG-25 itself, right over here, was utter garbage. Now, why was it utter garbage? I'll get to that in a minute, but why did it scare us? So, I don't know if you know this, but the MiG-25 was a very scary jet on paper. It could go higher, it can go faster, and it had an armament which we feared. At the time, we thought it was pretty much like, well, we lost. Cold War's over, guys, pack it up, it's over. You know, we thought, at the time, we were like, darn, we tried, guys. But little did we know at the time, they were lying. That whole inter-bureau rivalry with the Soviet Union thing, they needed results. They needed to give results to their head honcho. I forget who it was, but they needed to give results. And they gave results. Just so happened the results were terrible. So the engines itself, those they would give out after a few hundred hours. So it had a shelf life of milk, shelf life of milk. It had the turning radius of a small city block, and it had the RCS scale of about a house. RCS means radar cross section. So basically, like, imagine painting yourself pink, covering yourself in honey and berries, and trying to fight a bear. You're also naked, by the way. It was a pretty terrible aircraft. It terrified us because it's like, on paper, it seems great. Really quick, good armament, and it looks scary because it has 2 engines. And Congress freaked out. They were like, it's over. We lost. Pack it up, guys. And the psychopaths at Lockheed Martin and some other defense contractors spat this thing out. Now, this is probably, if not the greatest aircraft ever created. It is the scariest aircraft ever created, and that's for a reason. The F-15 is everything the MiG-25 wanted to be, and more. Quick, nimble, agile, adaptable. I mean, we've made more F-15s than pretty much anything. So the MiG-25, that's a big old B-U-S-T, bust. MiG-29, really don't have much to say. It's actually a good aircraft. Believe it or not, they kind of made something good. There's a series of variants of the MiG-29, and I really can't complain about it. Overall, it's a pretty good aircraft. This was pretty much like right before and right after the fall of the Soviet Union. So this was after they kind of liberalized and kind of pushed away from communism. So I'll give that the benefit of the doubt. Su-27 not as much, solely because it's a brick. Get to that later. The MiG-27, again, it's a swing wing. I love them, but they're trash. I'm sorry. Once again, it was a strike aircraft that really couldn't do strike aircraft activities. It was just bad. It was a bad aircraft. There's a reason that there's a huge chunk of them in the sands of Libya right now, not really doing a lot of flying. And then the Su-27, once again, garbage. It was another paper aircraft like the MiG-25 where it's like, over, it's over, we lost. Terrible, it's over, guys. It didn't really pan out. F-14, I guess I'll finish with the Su-27. Su-27, so it's an aircraft which the Russians are actively trying to make stealthy, quote unquote. It's not a stealthy aircraft, and it's actively kind of bad. It's a brick. I mean, it's made to be hyper maneuverable, quote unquote. That's why in the Su-30, which is basically, or Su-30, Su-33, it's basically an Su-27 with a new paint job and some cool missiles. It's basically just a brick that can kind of turn quickly, and after it does that, it really can't do anything else. So, trash. F-15, there's never been an F-15 shot down in combat. It has like a 101-0 kill rate, kind of crazy. F-16, there's a reason a lot of countries like it, a reason a lot of countries buy it. So that gets a good old check mark from me, along with the MiG-29. I just like the MiG-29. That gets a check mark from me. I suppose the Su-27 gets a half check because a lot of countries bought it, especially the Chinese. They kind of love the thing where they're J-11. Beside the point, the Chinese stole a lot of our stuff, so they get like a minus point for the J-11B. Minus, they get a big old minus check mark. Either way, F-18, lovely aircraft. There's a reason that the people drool over it. If you'd believe it, we make good aircraft. We don't have some Politburo, which it's like, oh, corruption. So we actually make kind of good stuff. F-14, not so much. It looked really cool. It was horrible for maintainers, and it was the worst engine airframe mix-up. They put bomber engines in there. You'd think that's kind of good, but they was really slow in the air variants, and that's why in the later D variants they addressed that issue. Now I have helper right here. So, alright, so I'm gonna... Good boy, do all. So... So, the F4 spawned out the F-15, F-16, F-18, and F-14. Everything else was kind of mid. Pretty much, if you buy American, you get something good. Who would have thought? Alright. I know this kind of felt like me talking about planes for 20 minutes, but this is where it kind of gets interesting. So I have this whole board behind me here, basically stating the history of... Basically stating... Dewey! Ow. Oh, he's a good boy. So I have a whole diagram, and I spent the last 20 minutes basically saying the history of aircraft and how certain political ideologies have led to developments in different areas. Western designers typically held to traditions of propellers and traditional notions of engineering. They typically were like, hey, it works, we know it works, we're going to push the boundaries here or there, but once it's proven, we got it. In the beginning, German scientists, German engineers, they basically were told to do whatever you want, though it has to fit within our ideological constraints. That's the reason the Germans didn't get the bomb when we did. Hitler thought it was Jewish and whatever. So, and it shows in the ME-262 how the 262 ultimately failed due to ideological constraints upon it because it was forced to be too many things that it really wasn't. And that's why fundamentally Soviet aircraft failed, because there was so much corruption in the Soviet Union and so much corruption and nepotism within the bureaus and the bureaucracies that it caused designers to be more, let's just say, open to accepting the fact that making something good doesn't really stop the commissar from, ending it, when what really matters is showing something big and scary. And that's why when we look at China and recently the J-36 that they showed off, that 3-engine bomber they had, that's why we don't do that. We don't show everyone the stuff we're working on because we don't need to. We don't need to scare people, because how our country's built up and how our ideology is built up, it's that we get results first, then we show, then we do. It's not performative, because that's what it is. That's what fundamentally it's how, when you look at aircraft designs and aircraft designers, where they're from really matters. Because if they're from a country where it's less about the performance and more about the show, you get Su-27s, you get MiG-25s, you get Su-9s. Like, I'm pulling really far back here. You get stuff that on paper it's amazing. It's this top of the line jet, but in actuality it really isn't. It really is a product of its age and a product of its design. Where in the West, Western aircraft is not exactly timeless, as when new technology comes out, new technology develops, it's completely obsolete, like what happened with the F-4 and the F-86 Sabre. But it's not that it becomes obsolete, it's that it's just phased out. It's like we all get a new phone every couple of years, not because the old one it's trash, it's terrible. It's that it just got old, it got obsolete. And that's why, like, the F-15, we still use the F-15 because we made it right once. That's why we still have the F-16, because we made it right once. We didn't let, I know Congress kind of did some stuff, and I know we had our own problems here, but our problems here aren't nearly as bad as they are in China and Russia. Because if you don't show something big and scary to the dictator, you don't get money, you don't get funding, because he doesn't believe you're doing well. So fundamentally, and this is the thing about all designers and all engineers, you have to not only prove results, because, like, even here, funding can get cut if you don't prove results. But the funding that gets cut here also feeds your family. Ideology ultimately constrains and grows engineers in different ways. When you're at war, it's less about the scariness of it, more about the effectivity, and that's why in the Second World War we got bangers of aircraft, and we also got some stinkers too. Like, there were some pretty bad aircraft that came out, but the majority of aircraft that came out were effective. They weren't exactly good, but they could get the job done. But when you get to interwar periods, it's where ideology takes over, and you get real you get performers. You don't get, real good aircraft. You get performers. And fundamentally, that's what this video is about. It's been about how the history of aircraft development really shows the failures of really collectivism and socialist ideologies, because they spit out really good-looking aircraft, but when you really break it down, it's garbage. The engines burn out. There's cannons in front of the intakes. It's just like, it doesn't make sense. In the West, we sometimes we shoot out some really ugly aircraft, but when you look in the nitty gritty of it, it's like, oh, so it has an actual purpose. That's kind of the gist of this whole thing. Sometimes it doesn't have to look good. It just has to have a purpose. And when you're in a socialist state, it has to look good regardless of its purpose.